Hello and welcome to Enlightened Empaths, your community for the spiritually awakened, where we discuss, explore, and connect with fellow empaths, healers, intuitives, and seekers. Hello, empaths, and welcome to the show. We're going to be talking about hidden folk and nature spirits this week, about connecting to the unseen, invisible world and connecting with some of our unknown and invisible helpers.
Right. And I think this connection, I've been talking about this a whole lot, and you've been very patient listening to me go on and on about it. I really do believe that the earth is asking us very nicely, please help. I want to heal. I want to be here for all of you. And there are spirits, there are nature spirits that want to help us reacclimate into this web of life and be part of the healing rather than part of the process of making it more difficult. And a good way to explain these hidden folk is when you take a walk in the woods and you get that feeling like something's behind you, or you feel like something's watching you, or that you're picking up on nuances or essences or feelings or sounds that feel like they're maybe a little unworldly. That can be a sign that you're connecting with the hidden folk and the nature spirits without even maybe realizing it.
Wait, we have to define that feeling though, because if I'm walking alone in the woods and I feel like someone is watching me, you can cue Keith Morrison from Dateline. Samantha was going through a walk in the woods. Little did she know.
Okay, see, that's a different feeling to
It's
me.
a different feeling. So I think we need to
Yes.
clarify, if you're walking in the woods and you feel like you're being watched, it's a different feeling, right? It's a feeling of what? Curiosity,
Yes.
joy? Okay.
Yes, or it's frequency and vibration. And I know we use that excuse for everything, but it's true that there's going to be a connection. And what's really cool, though, is that, well, how do you see the difference before I go yammering on and on?
Well, I think we have this spidey sense, people call it, this intuitive self-preservation sense. And so if you are walking somewhere alone and you feel that sense of being watched and the hair raises up on your arms and you feel it's Gavin de Becker describes it beautifully in his book, The Gift of Fear, and how a lot of people ignore it and they just are like, oh no, everything's fine. That's one feeling. But I think if you're walking in the woods and you feel completely safe and embraced, you feel comfortable, you feel like, you're just exactly where you're supposed to be, and you feel this connection to all that is, to me, that would be the difference.
Do you ever get that feeling when you are walking in the woods or in nature or a park or anywhere where all of a sudden you'll just stop and you'll be drawn to look in a certain direction and you don't know why?
Yes, I have had that.
Okay. And it's not an uncomfortable feeling. It's more of almost like something's trying to get your attention.
Yes, I told you that experience I had a couple of months ago that my kids still make fun of me about. We have this huge picture window and a back room in our house that overlooks our fence and the trees in the woods. And I had that feeling and I looked out and there was this tree. It's like, and two of its branches are like leaning over the fence and it was blowing in the wind. And I said to my kids, it looks like that tree is waving at us.
Yes. Well, they are living things.
Yes.
And I think that's part of our conversation today is how can we connect more with these living things, with these spirits, with these essences of nature so that we can feel like we're more a part of things.
The new studies are showing that trees talk to each other through their roots and they help each other and they give each other extra nutrients if their roots send messages that they need more water or help. I found those studies to be so heartwarming.
Oh, it's incredibly interesting. And years ago, I had heard that people feel so connected to spirit in forests and where there are tall trees because they work as antenna to divine, that they work as and I think that's a cool way to look at it too.
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting is there's hidden folks or nature spirits, but historically, this goes back for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years to all different cultures. Is part of it that we've become so domesticated and so removed from nature is that we're not as aware of their presence and energy because if you go back into different times, there's always been references to these spirits being a part of everyday life, or through folklore, or through stories that were passed down to keep cultures alive.
Yeah. And there's stories of gnomes and trolls, dwarves, leprechauns, pukwudgies, all sorts of types of nature spirits. And some
Right.
of them, from what I've read, are super positive and helpful, and some of them are tricksters.
Yes. Yes. And I always loved when, if you go back to the Renaissance, or the Victorian and Edwardian times in the UK, there are so many references to the nature spirits. And then the whole Celtic revival is another thing, because I think there's always been a connection to these energies. But as we've become more and more, again, I'm going to use that word, domesticated, and we've lost our connection with the natural world. It's almost like a staticky connection, and we need to turn the dial a little bit and fine tune that. But what's interesting is the energy, everything, these spirits that are in nature, they might feel different than if you've connected with ancestors or guides or angels or any other types of healers. The nature spirits, their job, their mission, their work, from what I understand and have learned over the years, is to be the go-between between our world and nature. And they can help us reconnect back into a deeper relationship with the natural world.
Yes, that is so true. Like when a place has been overused or neglected, or people have lost their connection with the land, these transcendent spirits will take a step back, and the environment isn't as spiritually healthy to them. So many believe that if we build relationships with these denizens of the natural world, true healing for the earth and planet can take place, which is such a gift to partake in. You look at the work that they're doing at Findhorn, for example, in Scotland.
I've known two friends over the course of my life that have spent time in Findhorn. They both came back changed. They said the magic there, the connection with the earth, the way the people interact with each other. It's a pretty fascinating thing to even read about, because it's been ongoing since the 70s, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The other thing, as I was thinking about this episode, was the world is having a lot of natural disasters right now. And if I wanted to go totally woo with this, could that be these nature spirits trying to get our attention and saying, please help? We need your help here. We need you to step in and be a part of this healing, not work against us. It could be.
Oh, for sure, because it seems to be getting worse and worse. Did you see that picture they posted last year about where you know that phrase fast fashion?
Yes.
There's literally an island, I believe it's in South America, where all these like Forever 21s and H&M and Shein type places, anything that doesn't sell at the end of the season, they just dump the clothes on this island. And they're just sitting there with all their chemicals and whatnot. And they're just sitting there.
I have such a physical, nauseous reaction to that I can't even explain it, of how disrespectful that is, and how this is judgy pie, so forgive me, but the waste and just the sense that anyone would have a right to do that.
It's awful.
Mm.
It's awful. And then I saw a news report just this week where they were doing a deep investigation into these recycling places. And it really pissed me off for all the obvious reasons, but also because I take a lot of time in my life, in my day, to recycle. Don't you? Like I wash out peanut butter jars. And this deep dive showed that only 3% of what we recycle is actually recycled.
And there's a whole market, and you have to find the buyers for it. And it's an industry. It's a huge industry, which in a way ties back to, if you can simplify and decide, is this being conscious of where you're spending your money, how you're spending your money, what you're using for products. And I'm not saying minimalist is the answer. I'm just saying being more conscious is really important.
Yeah, I do too. And so there is this idea that there are these nature folks who are in charge of taking care of this earth and this world. And I've often wondered if that's why in mythology and legends and stories, so many of them are seen as tricksters and kind of not so nice because maybe they are mad at us and the way we're just taking over everything, you know? My daughter Olivia is traveling through Italy this week and she keeps sending me these photos and videos of this incredible landscape that looks like something out of, a Diane Lane movie. Like it's just insane how beautiful and vast it is. And at one point I texted her and I said, geez, honey, if this were our town, they'd be building a car wash, a church, and a strip mall on that.
Right. So
Because we just aren't respecting those open, vast spaces of land anymore.
which are vital for these hidden folk, but also for life in general, for the planet. Um, and as intuitives, as mediums, we've been feeling it. Many of people have been feeling it, that the veils are getting thinner or they're almost non-existent, right, in these recent years. So if the spirit, we both know that the spirit world interacts and intersects with the physical world. Is that why this is becoming more pronounced with this draw for healing as well, or this connection with the fairies, with the that catch-all term that is used for so many of these beings? But just the fact that it's been over 700 years of use in the English language, with fairies, with elves, with goblins, with imps, it's kind of hard to just discredit that as not being a thing.
Yeah, especially when you see it, like you said before, in every culture throughout history before, boats and sea travel connected us. I find that always so fascinating. What about this idea of the green man? You see that a lot. I've never really studied that, and I know you have. Can you tell us what he embodies?
Well, a lot of people and across many cultures, these nature spirits are often seen as a combination of the natural world and pretty much human-like attributes or characteristics. And the green man, if you're not familiar with them, do a Google, or the green woman, the green person, there's a group there. It has the structure of a human, but has a foliage crown, a beard of leaves, and that this has been depicted in architecture going way back to medieval times, because it's showing that connection between the spirit world and the physical world, and a being that is exemplifies that tree energy, that green energy, that natural growth. And as empaths, you can't help but wonder, would someone who is a plant empath, who's very, very sensitive to all things that grow in nature and gardens and flowers, and we've both spoken with people, we both know that connection, would they have an easier way of connecting with someone like the green man, or with nature spirit that comes to help with the gardens, versus someone who is working with the ocean and whales and dolphins? Would they work with a different energy and frequency of a nature spirit? It's really interesting.
Oh, for sure. I mean, people with the quote unquote green thumb, and they just tend to work with nature so much better. And I think whatever you're interested in is also interested in you, right? So if you're very connected to nature in that way, I think you would attract the positive aspects of the nature spirits more easily. I think it's all about interaction and being open to that. Remember my story of the fairy tree?
Yes.
My kids were so into fairies when they were little. I mean, like 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 years old. And they would often talk about seeing fairies. And each of them talked about one had 3 fairies, one had 2 fairies. And my youngest had 1 fairy, but they all gave them names. And I remember being like, what the heck is going on? I thought these kids have such a beautiful imagination. And so in front of or next to our house is this beautiful big tree. And we decided to make that our fairy tree. And so we built a little fairy village. And oh my gosh, the kids had so much fun with that when they were little. And we had little solar lanterns in the tree. And we put a little fairy door in there when they were at school one day. So they came home and they were like, where'd that come from? And I was like, I don't know. So it was just like really fun to do that. But then weird stuff started happening at the fairy tree. This beautiful plant grew that did not plant, had never seen before. And crystals started appearing there that, I know my crystals. They're like my little crystal friends. I know every crystal I have. They were not my crystals, and they just started randomly appearing there. And I don't know, it was just a fascinating time. And as my kids got older and got into middle school and stopped leaving, because we'd go for walks all the time and they'd pick up a feather or a rock or a pine cone and they'd leave it at the fairy tree. And then, of course, all of that stopped, and all the cool stuff appearing and disappearing at the fairy tree, that stopped too.
Which makes sense because from what I've understood over the years, there needs to be reciprocity. Like you leave an offering, you let them know appreciation, you show gratitude. And the fact that the girls intuitively gave them names, that was another thing that, and from, if you're looking at any kind of journey work where you're going to another world to meet with these entities, these beings, these spirits, that's what they say, treat them like they're a living individual, give them a name, ask them their name, they're going to have a personality. Because did the girls, just out of curiosity, did the girls describe each of the fairies as different little unique beings?
Yes, they all had different names. They had different personalities. They would help them in different ways. One of them always helped them when they were swimming in the pool. Another one always helped them when they were nervous at school, all sorts of things. And I mean, my youngest, when she was 4, brought me a piece of paper and a pencil and said, I have a story to dictate that my fairy told me, write it down. I mean, she didn't use the word dictate, but
yeah.
And I still have that little story.
Now, see, this makes perfect sense to me in the sense of little kids haven't shut it down. They're still wide open. So why wouldn't they see them and interact with them? And so many children have their invisible friends or their, my brother had a friend and there was a river that ran down behind the house where I grew up. And he had a name and he said, and I remember my mother saying, well, where does he live? And he had a really unique name. And his name was Mulak, was the invisible friend's name. And he said, oh, Mulak lives under the ice in the winter. And then in the summer, he lives over in those trees. There was this whole life that this being lived, back in that time. Oh, it's an imaginary friend or whatever. But you could tell, because he's a younger sibling, how real it was for him. And I think we all have access to that if we choose.
Yes, if we choose. And if we're interested in it, because I think it has to be a part of who you are, right? Like
right.
my 2 nephews, we were just talking about this the other night at dinner. They came over for like a game of cards and we were talking about their cat. Now my nephews they're like your boys. They're just, they drive pickup trucks and, they're very whatever, but they love cats. And no matter where they go, they find stray cats and the stray cats come to them and they either keep them or they rehome them. But it's happened, we were counting up between the 2 of them, it's happened 6 times. I have found stray cats, they don't come to me. I have tried so hard to get a stray cat to get in my car so I can help it if it needs help, but they just run from me. But these 2 boys have such beautiful hearts and they're so connected to nature and they're big campers and they're big hikers that they just attract these animals. So I think it's a 2-way street.
I agree. The other thing that, if we're going to talk about this whole fairy world and other beings, is the people who do the light language, and they're from other dimensions, but they also connect with the fairies and the gnomes, and there's different frequencies and vibrations that they bring through with that. So it's also interesting. Okay, here's another kind of a diversion, but not really. A lot of people lately have been talking about seeing things out of their peripheral vision, whether it's shadows or movement or all of that stuff. And I wonder too if they're picking up on some things that are from these hidden realms. Not
For sure.
necessarily a human or a ghost or things that we usually discuss, but I wonder if, one of the things they talk about throughout all of this folklore, as far as part of this hidden, are the brownies, who are a typical household spirit. and it's from Scottish folklore, but they've also been in English and Germanic folklore as well. But they're known originally for helping the farmers and doing outdoors tasks, but they're seen as working. They come to help. They come to our little kids when they're seeing that, or when our animals are seeing, or we're seeing things. Are we picking up on something else that might be visiting?
Oh, I definitely think that's a possibility. So let's say you're walking through the woods and you do feel this benevolent energy of something kind watching you or staring at you. What do we do with that to engage our spiritual side and to connect?
I am a big fan of respect when it comes to nature, when it comes to holding space for people, when it comes to all of that. And I think this sounds like I'm a complete wingnut, but sometimes I'll be by myself in the woods with the dogs and I'll get that feeling and I'll just turn and I'll wave and I'll say, hi, hi, how are you? And I just, it makes me so, well, I do, because I can feel them. I know they're there and I want to let them know I'm friendly. Or I'll say thank you. I'll say thank you for being here, because it's interesting to me that how different is that than picking up with a person who's transitioned into spirit? It's just another being.
Yeah, that's true. That's very, very true. Whenever I plant, because I don't have a green thumb, I try very hard to have a green thumb. Right now, it's more like a mustardy green. I'm working on it. And so my goal has been to have jasmine planted all along my fence and just totally covering it so it's a green fence. Last year I planted a bunch of jasmine and half of it's doing well and the other half is very, very much struggling. So this spring I bought some more jasmine and planted more along the fence. And I thought of you, Denise, and I'm putting in the right fertilizer and all the good natural stuff. But I did say, if there are any fairies or nature spirits here, please help this jasmine to grow and be happy and flourish. And I'm telling you, it's doing fantastic. So much better than the jasmine I planted last year.
Right.
Is that intention? Is that the power of our mind? Is that these invisible helpers? I don't know.
I think that's wonderful. Because you're right. And there are some people that would say, well, it's the soil conditions or the weather is different, or you gave it more water. And that might be a factor as well, the realistic part of my brain. But when you invite in, if you choose to invite in these invisible helpers, these hidden folk, these fairies, these gnomes, the stone people who hold the ancient wisdom. So you have to wonder, with your connection to crystals, are you connecting with the energy of the stone people who hold the ancient wisdom, which all of the crystals do? So again, it's just another dynamic. The world is a vast realm. We know that. Wouldn't it make sense that there would be a connection with all of the individual elements of nature?
It would. And it's hard for me, though, because I have my mind and my heart.
Yes.
And my mind tells me one thing and my heart tells me another thing. But, who knows? Chloe and I were watching, there's an old show called Fact or Fiction Beyond Belief. Did you ever watch that?
Doesn't sound familiar.
Okay. It's not like an intelligent show, but it's fun. And they'll show you like 5 stories that are beyond belief. And at the end, you have to guess which ones are true and which ones are false. And there's this one story about this flower shop owner who's murdered. And there's, I don't know, 3 or 4 suspects. And they can't figure out who the suspect is. And so they hook up the flowers to this like lie detector machine and they bring in the suspects. And the lie detector machine goes crazy when the grandson comes in. And they're like, oh, you're the one who did it. And he confesses. So Chloe and I, whenever we watch that show, we'll write down, like, I think this one's true. And then we see who wins.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we both looked at each other and we were like, that one's fiction. And at the end of the show, that one was true. And I'm like, no way. So I Googled it and yeah, they had embellished it, but it is based on a true story where I can't remember what the machine was that they hooked the plants up to, but it did react strongly when the grandson walked in.
I saw an ad for something you could clip onto a leaf and it would bring through. And I was very cynical about it, I have to be honest. And if it's a real thing, I hope it is, because it sounded lovely. and it would play the melody of the plant, like it would play
Oh,
music.
yes, yes. My kid sent me that. Isn't that beautiful? It works on
Yes,
the vibration of the plant and it makes
yes,
its own song.
yes. And I don't know if it's real or not, but I thought it was interesting. And when you think about all of the studies, if you scream at a plant or play heavy metal or you play classical or you tell it, boy, you're a beautiful plant, the difference in growth and thrive.
Yeah, and that is true. And I mean, studies have borne that out. That's not woo woo.
No, we're both educated, intelligent people. We can hold a conversation in public without making complete asses out of ourselves most of the time. And I think when you start talking about gnomes and fairies and pixies, and it's a little out there. And then to other people, it's completely normal and just part of the whole existence of things. So tolerance and maybe curiosity are the best way to go into this topic.
I just think there are different dimensions. I think there are different realities that we're not aware of in our three-dimensional world. I think there's so much more out there that we're still trying to grasp and understand. And I do believe that everything has consciousness. I read an article, I think it was on the Rhine Institute or the paranormal research page, but they presented findings that scientists have started to put together showing that houses have consciousness. Did you see that?
I haven't seen that, but I do think houses, well, they hold the frequency of whoever has lived there,
Right.
and it holds a unique energy.
Yeah, I think everything has consciousness and we're just starting to really start to understand what that means. And surely the earth has its own energy, its own resonance, its own vibration. And yes, we have personified it, Mother Nature, Mother Earth, but it is a living, breathing thing that we are existing with and on. And we do need to respect it. And maybe consciously connecting with nature in this way is just a first step towards doing that.
Again, if you've done any kind of journey work to different realms using shamanic practices or meditation, or you've gone into even the Akashic records, you go into another dimension, you step into a different realm, you'll encounter things. And you made a really, really good point a few minutes ago of being open-minded enough to believe, to just accept it and say, this is something I'm really interested in. Let's see what's out there. It doesn't have to be, you have to be able to go back to that childlike wonder that comes so naturally to children and experience that again by meeting these other dimensional beings.
Yeah, I agree. And it's the way I look at it is, kind of a give and take, right? So I try to always give back to the earth in some way through planting things, through taking care of my yard in an organic way that is healthy and whole, through recycling, even though apparently that's not doing much, but I still try to do my part, right?
Right.
We
And
do beach cleanups and we pick up litter when we can. I think that you can engage with this world in a way that feels proactive, even when the news is kind of, you know, not feeling that way.
right. And from what I understand, there's also, so say people around the planet all decided to work with the energy of water. Let's just make it an elemental, that the element of water. And so many people started to work with these nature spirits that support water. It can help with the healing that needs to happen. This has been seen in different cultures, in different communities where this has happened. These are normalized in history everywhere. You can go back to the Alvin were a type of fairy from Holland who are attached to bodies of waters, lakes, rivers, pond, and there's a river that is sacred to them. So, and they'll go into the way they travel and how they work and when they come out and what that's involved. That example can also go to a different culture with a different. So if there is a hidden element that oversees that healing of the water, of the trees, of fire, of air, if we can come together, and even if it's just in hope, I don't think it's going to hurt anything, because so many times, and doesn't it just curiosity wise, because I can get the pinball going in my head. If this was normalized hundreds of years ago, was there a reason to separate people from this in order to push forward a different trajectory for people?
Sure. Manifest destiny, right? In order to just take over and conquer.
Yes. And now if we're being drawn back to this connection with nature, this connection with these hidden spirits, this connection that people hundreds of years ago were quite comfortable with and saw as just part of, I think a lot of times when we talk about this, people immediately get the picture of Tinkerbell and the Pixies in their mind, little cutie things that float around. And there are other names for pixies are dusters and piskies and grigs and pickers, and they're from Scottish and English origin. And, they're small, they're winged, but there's culture, there's history, there's story that supports this. Is that a creature or an energy that can help us? And it would be interesting to see if you invited pixies to come and play with the jasmine, what would happen? Just for the fun of it. It's free. Nobody needs to know, because it's not like you're out there doing a pixie dance.
I don't know, Denise. I'm suspicious. I think about when Iceland rerouted an entire highway because that was one of the ferry roads, and they didn't want to piss off the ferries.
Yes.
So
yes. And the caves
I'd be nervous
to
do that. Yes.
Yeah, because it comes back to that respect part. The gnomes of the other there. Think when you picture many people, if you say the word gnome, they're going to picture the little short stout with the pointy hat that is in a garden somewhere. But historically, and there is more that they live in the roots and the trunks of ancient trees, and that the stereotype is that the males have long white beards and white hair and the red hats, and sometimes the females, they'll show them holding little tiny babies, but their job, their work as an elemental is to protect the forest and the wildlife around them. And they're the guardians, the watchtowers of the north, if you're doing any kind of magic circle or opening to the four directions. But it's a different kingdom. It's a different experience. And so when you have gnomes that live in your garden, they say that your garden is really blessed. I wonder if it's a compliment or an insult to put one of those little gnomes in the garden.
Oh, I never thought of that.
I didn't either until just now.
They might be like, we don't look like that, lady. Okay, so I have a question for you. If we have a guardian angel and a spirit guide and an animal guide, do you think we have fairy guides or nature spirit guides?
Yes, I think we can connect with them. Yes, and maybe, I don't know if they're guides or if they're energies and spirits we meet along the road for where we are. So since I've lived all over the country, I've lived in a lot of different places, many believe that there are nature spirits that are to that specific part of the country or world. So if I was living I lived in Southern Oregon years ago, would be very different than living in rural Maine, would be different than living in the panhandle of Florida, would be different than living outside of the Yaqui Reservation in Tucson. All really, really unique ecostructures. So there would be hidden energy spirits for those lands. Who would live there? When you get back to the house fairies or the creatures that might be part of more connected with our everyday world, and aren't completely just in the natural world, they'll say that they have traveled with families. So when the big immigration of Scottish and Irish people years and years ago, that they would bring these beings with them. They traveled with them. They were part of the family. So it's kind of a fun thing to explore.
It really is. And it's just a beautiful way to engage your everyday life when you connect with nature. It helps us feel grounded, rooted, stable, nurtured. And I think it's a good reminder that we always have to give back to nature.
Right. The Greeks, you don't get much further back than the connection with mythology. And the dryads were originally a Greek type of tree fairy or spirits of the trees, but they're known worldwide. And that goes back to that feeling in the woods. And if you've ever stood and listened to the trees blowing, like you just, if you're in a quiet enough place where you can hear the wind in the trees, it does have a unique sound. And many people that believe in this would say that you're hearing their whispers, but people have seen wisps of light that go from treetop to treetop. There's a thought that this might be where the Celtic priesthood of Druids came from, because Druids worship really did center around trees, and tree groves were where they held a lot of their practices. And Daphne, the most famous of the dryads, who was pursued by the god Apollo and then turned into a laurel tree. So if you like this kind of stuff, or if you have that feeling that everything is interconnected on some level, this might be something that you find really resonates with you, and you can connect with them, get to know them a little bit.
Well, I'd love to hear from our listeners if they have had a connection with these nature spirits. I think you guys should reach out and email us. We could include it in our next community connection show. How about that?
That sounds wonderful.
It would be fun.
As much as I love this and do believe there are many realms and many ways to access them, and we are interconnected, and we can ask for help and show respect, there is also that part that questions, because we've been so conditioned to not believe that it's a possibility.
Yes. But if we engage it, we can at least open ourselves up to that possibility. And again, it could just all be about intention. But if you put that positive intention out there, it's going to come back to you. And I don't think anyone has ever felt worse from connecting with nature. It always enriches and nourishes us. So I think it's a wonderful thing to do. And if you've had an experience with nature or a nature spirit, do email us, enlightenedempaths@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you.
I really do think they want to help. They want to help us get back on track. We can become a part of this healing that so desperately wants to happen on the earth right now.
Well said. Thank you, Denise, for presenting this information. It's been eye-opening for me, and I'm hopefully for our listeners as well. Guys, we hope you have a great week. Please remember, as always, to show up, do great work, and share your light.
Take care.